Welcome to They Learn, You Win, the podcast from Skooks. I'm your host, David Wentworth. My guest today is Silvi Mercier, the Strategic Training Manager for the EMEA region for Fluke Corporation. The company produces measurement and monitoring products and software used in electronic design, manufacturing, and software. And it's across industries, electrical, industrial, medical, you name it. And, Silvi has spent her career creating global curriculums, leading learning interventions, developing talent, coaching and mentoring, and integrating the latest learning technologies in her organizations. She's also a professor at Tilburg University in the Netherlands, as well as a guest lecturer and a speaker at TED conferences. So in this episode, Silvi draws on that extensive career to discuss the similarities and differences between learning in the corporate and academic worlds, as well as how the two can learn from each other. So enjoy the episode. So Silvi, thanks for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate you making some time. You've got a somewhat of a unique background, at least when compared to some of the folks that I speak to, because it crosses a wide array of learning and training environments, from academia to corporate to very sort of technical, very specific corporate learning. And so I think you've just got a very broad perspective that you can bring and help shine a little light, because I run into this a lot with conversations about there's these two schools of thought, right? There's this academic learning environment and there's more of a corporate learning environment. And what are the similarities, the differences, the pros and cons? And I think we need to start to figure this out, because it always seems to be such a very wide gap between what people are accustomed to, say, in academia and university, then they get into a job in a corporate world, and those things are vastly different. So we want to talk a little bit about, from your perspective, having lived in all of those worlds, what you see as some of the stark differences. At least we could start there between the two. And if you could help us, when we talk about sort of academia, that academic environment, what does that mean to you?
Well, very broadly, because I want to make sure that people understand that academic shouldn't be a scary term. I think that there are skills that we can learn from people who have been in the business for a really long time, from people that have been, for example, through teachers training or even adult education certification, that we can incorporate into corporate training. So by academic, I mean anything where people have to be in the classroom. So they're obligated either by the government or by the state or the province to be in the classroom. So that's a very academic setting. And the trainers, teachers are certified. So here I'm speaking about primary school, junior high school, and to some extent, colleges and universities, although the requirement there is more flexible, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I mean by academic. And I think that we also need to be wary of using the term academic in a corporate environment, because a lot of times people think academic really doesn't belong in corporate, right? Corporate is about profit and selling products. Nevertheless, if you are thinking of moving from an academic environment, let's say you're a high school teacher like I was, and you're thinking of moving into corporate, there's so much that that you have experience with, that you can bring into corporate, and it's a fantastic move. And yeah, if you're like me, you'll love it and you'll want to carry on working in corporate.
Mm. So in that sort of academic that you described, that academic environment, that's sort of the sole purpose, right, of the people being there at all. Sole purpose is the learning. Whereas in the corporate space, learning is a small slice of why they are wherever they are, right? And it's oftentimes we're challenged at trying to insert that into their into their work life. So given the challenge of sort of this completely captive audience whose basically sole outcome is learning, right, versus somebody in a corporate world where that's not the case, clearly, um, you know, what are some of the things that we can do in the corporate space that that might not be necessary in academia because of the nature of the audience? So things that we have to work on to sort of engage, get people invested in. What are some of the things that we can do to do that better?
That's an excellent question, but let me first clear something up for you.
Sure.
In the corporate world, when we speak about training, we could be speaking about training externally or training internally.
Hmm.
Most of the time when we speak about training internally, that's a lot of the times learning and development. I'm involved in training to our customers and training internally, which means onboarding our salespeople, for example.
Mhm.
Learning development is more aligned with human resources. Nevertheless, across let's say an academic setting like a college, a corporate training or L&D, there are a lot of skills from a trainer that are actually transferable. So they're transferable skills, and I think that that's what you're asking me. What are the skills that one can take from one to the other?
Mhm.
Because it might be possible that somebody who's been in L&D decides to go back to university, get their teaching qualification, and go and become a teacher. The skills that are most common across the three are first and foremost a passion for learning. And that's not necessarily that I'm learning, but a passion for how other people learn. So basically, I am the medium for facilitating learning to happen. So I think that that's actually across the board what anyone who's interested in teaching or training needs to have. I think it comes more naturally to some people than others, but it can be learned. It's a learned skill. Another thing that is common across the three is your people management skill, your classroom management. So if you're going to be standing in front of, I don't know, it could be 10 people, it could be 20, it could be 100, you need to be able to have that persona to carry them with you, and for example, introduce training or a learning, an objective, in a way that resonates with your audience. Another thing, just to mention three, because I could go on forever,
Good.
is the ability to evaluate whether you are actually getting through what you want to get through, what you want your learners to be able to learn. So, three moments that you could be doing that is at the beginning, where you actually do an icebreaker just to get the activation of the prior knowledge. How much do you know, so that I can get you engaged in this topic or this hands-on training? Because everybody knows something about what you're going to train, even if it's a topic that's brand new to them. You
Mhm.
can make it personable to them, right? So you can do the activation of prior learning. You can also do a small formative assessment in the middle of your training. And lastly, you need to do a summative assessment, right? Something that ties it all up, that actually lets you see whether that thinking and manipulation of the training, if you like, has actually sunk in, so that they can go on and do what you've taught them.
That third point that you bring up is an important one in this uh, sense that you're talking a lot about training external audiences, like so customers, right? So if your company sells software and you're going to train your companies on your software, or you sell, equipment and you want to train people on the equipment, you get these degrees of separation, right? So, in academia, it's direct. The idea that people are there to learn, and the outcome of the learning is whether they are learning or not, right? So that you can easily measure that with its captive audience. And then you've got corporate training, like L&D, internal, harder to do for a lot of companies, and because that's not people's only focus. And so how do we measure that? But then when you get external now, when you're talking about training customers, is that a bigger challenge? Seems to me a bigger ask, because to deliver this kind of training, which is difficult in the first place, and then to go to a customer and say, well, now we want to give you an assessment or a test on that training, sometimes feels like, can we really do that?
Yeah.
So how do you measure success with that kind of an audience, an external audience, where you can't just, because you don't have access to them all the time because they're your customer?
Indeed, I think that's a very good question, because it's extremely challenging to do it as an external. So let's say, for example, that you have a group of people that want to be trained, and they also want certification, so that they can then do the job that they need to do. Right? You deliver the training. You have your formative assessment, your summative assessment, right? And then they go off with a certificate of completion, right? They go off and they do what they're supposed to be doing. Now, I'm not going to be able to follow them in 3 months or 6 months to evaluate again whether that knowledge has remained or whether it's become, standard work for them. So that's where, in some cases, and I haven't had this experience, but in some cases, the training body and the human resources body for that trained group do get aligned, and they keep on talking to one another. And perhaps one thing that could be done is keep in touch with the training manager on the other side, so on the customer side, and ask, how's it going? How are the evaluations going? And is what we taught still being practiced? Has it become standard work? In some cases, they must come back yearly to get recertified, which, is helpful, right? But in a lot of cases, that's not the case. It's an excellent question, David.
Yeah.
Is that visibility that is often hampered by the fact that we're not allowed to have access to those records. We're not allowed access to the human resources or the manager that is evaluating the person that we trained.
Right.
So there's a lot of privacy concerns about that. But if we were able to bridge that gap, I think that it would be a huge benefit for us as part of the feedback loop, right? How do we deliver this training better the next time? And also a huge benefit to the companies that have hired us to give training, because then they would be able to say, okay, this worked so far. And the next time, could you include this or that in your curriculum?
Yeah. Do you find in those cases where that that bridge that you described is either not happening or not happening to a great extent, does the feedback loop then sort of default to customer satisfaction, right? So suddenly the way customers feel about the particular product or software, whatever it is that they've purchased, the product team or sales team might get feedback on the product that may indicate there is something within the training that's either good or bad or could be changed, but you have to decipher that. Is that sort of what ends up happening? Is everyone has to get together and look at customer feedback and decipher whether it's something with the product, something with
I
the
wish.
training?
I
Yeah.
wish. That's the dream state. That's the
Yeah.
dream state. So in my position right now, I'm looking to bring all of those stakeholders together, because there's nothing stronger in building a training strategy or a building curriculum than having data to support the decisions that you're making as a training manager, right? So if you think, for example, we launch a product, the product gets trained, we get feedback on what is working, what is not working so well. There's many different organizations within the corporation that get feedback, right? So I'm kind of like the little spider that's reaching out to all of the different colleagues and asking them for data to be able to understand, okay, either I can help you in creating an additional training or changing the training that we are doing, so that, for example, there are fewer customer tickets, right? Customer resolution tickets. Or it could be that the customer resolution manager, right? The aftercare manager is saying to me, hey, Sylvie, this issue came up 3 times this week, and it came up 5 times the week after that, and it came up 15 times the week after that. This is something that we need to work on. So it could be that we create an additional training, or in my previous position, what I did is I was looking at data to create knowledge management articles. So I kind of work with everyone as much as I can to build my networks, because it's the amount of people that I talk to and the data that we're able to share that actually shapes the way that I'm going to be creating my training strategy and my roadmap.
Yeah. And what's great about that is that's a specific, example where there's a clear or a set of clear metrics and outcomes that you can measure learning by. I think that customer tickets, help desk tickets is a great metric that sometimes isn't connected to learning when it should be, because that's the whole point. It isn't necessarily, oh, I have all these help tickets, help desk tickets, because there's something wrong with the product. It's that we haven't addressed this particular training issue with the product. And I think learning and development teams or training teams love to have solid metrics that the business recognizes very clearly, right? So the reduction in tickets is that everyone speaks that language, and it's very easy to say this is something that we're after, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. In my previous job, I was always looking for verbatims, customer verbatims, to try to determine whether we needed additional training, whether we needed to actually simplify training, because that's also a key thing. Training does not have to be everything all at once. It's better to have it scaffolded. So the teachers listening today will understand what scaffolded means. And also between the lines, if you're reading customer verbatims, there's nuggets of gold that you can feed up to the research department, to the product managers, to the marketing team, that are very, very helpful in developing new products or improving the products that we have right now. A strategic training manager means that you are always looking for where that information might be lying and thinking who this might be useful for. So beyond training, always thinking, I'm part of a corporation and my job is also to bring people in and share what I have.
Yeah. I think you've touched on something I think might be very interesting is the topic of AI comes up in almost every conversation about anything these days. And I know in the past, and I have a past as a researcher looking at data and studies. And one of the biggest challenges was always open-ended responses in a survey, right? So you're talking about customer verbatims, things the customers say. And companies have been very challenged if you have got a scale, a lot of that kind of input, right? Verbatims, quotes, input, freehand input. It's very difficult to parse, very difficult to do at scale. But now I think you've got these AI tools that you could take scores of input directly from customers verbatim. And the
Yeah.
system could then say, this is the sentiment that I'm picking up. Here are the key
Yes.
elements that are coming, which is something we couldn't do before. And if you're just asking people to answer multiple choice questions, you've already sort of led them in a direction or given them these guardrails of this is the only things that we're thinking about. But if you say, tell me whatever you want to tell me, and
Yep.
then you can look at that from a big picture, I think there's a lot to be done there.
Yeah, I had a great experience with an intern actually. First of all, let me just say that um, it's absolutely important in corporate training to finish the training with a summary of what you're training, thanking your audience for taking the time to do the training, and then reminding them that the most useful bit of the training for us is the reaction from them. So a customer satisfaction survey. Yeah. So customer satisfaction surveys should be short, no longer than 5 or 6 questions, right? But that's where you get a lot of the verbatims. Now, if you're not analyzing the customer satisfaction verbatims on a regular basis, let them go for 5 months, it's a mountain of information that you have to go through and try to even remember which date, which product, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we had an intern who took those verbatims and created a large language model. That's
Mhm.
correct, right?
Yep.
Large language model, applied AI, and we were able to see more clearly what the customers were feeling, that
Mhm.
sentiment. So my point is that AI is very important. We can use it to analyze verbatims, but you do need someone who knows what they're doing. And if you're lucky, you have to keep them on your payroll.
That's there's the opportunity for a tool like AI, like a large language model, to solve this particular challenge. But you also need, like you say, need to be specific about what tool you're using and how is it trained. There's a lot of things that go into the choice of doing it, but I think there's great potential.
Yeah, and it was fantastic to work with these people, right? Because obviously they're data analysts, right?
Hmm.
But you need to have, again, going back to those insights, you need to have a real feeling for what you're training, for what your customer wants, for what the pain points are, because a large language model analysis of verbatims, unless you know what you're looking for, it can be useless. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you really need to have a good management team to guide the data analysts to tell them, hey, give us information, give us knowledge, give us graphics, so that we can interpret the data and actually share it across the higher management to make better decisions.
I want to come back to something you were talking about a bit ago. We usually talk about the different parts of the organization that training can look to. When we were talking about the idea of these external audiences, customer training, that sort of thing, and how difficult it can be to reach these audiences and engage them the way you would someone inside the organization. There are places in the organization that can help. I think we've talked about it briefly before, but like the marketing team, right? If you have marketing leadership, what are some of the takeaways? Because you don't have, if you're looking for help on how to do this better, sometimes the best resource is right there within your organization, right?
Yeah, that's very common. I think a lot of times corporations will look to outsource for help when internally there's so much talent. And yeah, it's a matter of building your network. As a training manager, you need to build your network and get to know the people that you're working with, understand what they're doing, what they're not doing, because there's also parameters and limits to how they can help you. I love working with the marketing team because they understand, for example, the importance of storytelling. So again, going back to what is training, right? Training is a transfer of knowledge or enabling people to improve what they're doing so that they can do it faster, they can do it better, right? But
Mm-hmm.
training always happens in context. So, for example, I see the drums behind you, right? If I
Mm-hmm.
were to teach you how to play drums, I wouldn't say, okay, go and tap something for me. I would say, hey, if let's take your favorite band, right? I imagine, David, I'm making this up, huh? I imagine that it's AC/DC, right? And you're gonna say,
Sure.
yeah, okay, right. Well, do you know the drummer and you know what he did? So there is a story to be told in order to make training stick.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you like, there's a story to be told in order to hook the trainee in and stay engaged with you throughout the training. So the marketing team understands that, and I really love the way that they can use training, for example, as a commercial tool, right?
Yeah.
Um, a customer has a pain point, and training might be the solution. Or it could be that a customer has a particular question, right? So how do you answer that question? And I listen for those questions because I know that if the marketing team is doing their analytics and there's a lot of clicks on that high to question, then I know that I can build an additional training based on that. So the marketing team has been really inspirational for me. And I learned recently about account-based marketing,
Mm-hmm.
and that blew my mind because in training and learning and teaching, we often talk about personalization, right? So how do you personalize training to the person that's standing in front of you, right? So differentiated learning. And account-based marketing does the same thing. It says, okay, we're going to market, right? But we're going to market very differently to the CEO, to the order manager, or to the end user. That kind of blew my mind because I thought, oh my God, I didn't know about account-based marketing until recently, but actually they're applying the same principles that we learned at Teachers College. Your group may be 10 people, but all of them are different and you have to differentiate for them. So it's great to have a conversation with somebody in the marketing team and they understand words like differentiation and personalization.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about creating relevancy. I mean, it's such a key thing, and learning has been talking about that now for a few years. But to figure out the best practices on how to do that, your marketing team has probably been working on relevancy for a lot longer, and a lot
Yes.
of great lessons to be learned there. That's you got a whole
Yeah.
team that's dedicated to pushing out engaging, informative content, making it sticky, making people come back. All the things that learning and training have been trying to do. So it makes a lot of sense. There's something else though can happen is you talk about the relevance and the context. I think what happens in some companies, especially when you're talking about training on a product or training on software, right? In the marketing realm or the sales realm, that hook can be a demo, right, of what it is. But does that necessarily translate in a training world, right? I mean, because you can almost see that, well, we already show people how to use it. Isn't that how we're going to train them on it? Is there a different approach to that?
There is, and there has to be, right? Because marketing ultimately is about converting leads. And training, especially training as a product, yeah, also is about getting people to buy your product ultimately. But there has to be that difference in that the training needs to be something that, let's say, relieves, for lack of a better term, relieves a pain point. So I'm not a marketeer, right? So please, don't take what I say as being the truth. But the way that I see it is marketing's goal is to get a customer interested in the product or interested in the solution, whereas training's goal is to solve a problem or answer a question, and ultimately, of course, also sell the product. So they do overlap a little bit, but there's also a difference. You will never see a marketing campaign that lasts for 2 hours,
I hope
but you
not.
will have a training that is 2 hours.
Yeah, which we should probably have less of that too. Yeah, but it's important to see the difference of what the ultimate goal of that training is, right? It isn't just a walkthrough or a demo and showing all the. There's
No,
a
no,
lot
and
more.
it has to be, and it has to be different. Another thing that I really love, and learned from marketing is the voice of customer, right? So what does the customer say? And you do this by interviewing them. So you can do qualitative research or quantitative research. What does the customer say that they need? What are the differences in that segment, right? That market that are changing, that are creating new opportunities for training. So yeah, you always have to be thinking, not what I want because I'm the expert and I'm the trainer, and therefore this must be what people want to learn. That will never hit the mark. Good training is about understanding what the learner needs, what the learner wants, and building it for them.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no real other way to create relevancy. I mean, you can try to understand your audience as best you can, but the best way is from them directly. And I think, some organizations, both from a internal training and external customer learning, they do open feedback channels. And people, they say, oh, we want to hear from the learners. But then are you actually doing anything with that feedback? And can you demonstrate that you're, because I think that's a big key to, you say, oh, you give us feedback here. But if the learners, the audience over time realizes that none of this it's just going out into the void and that's it, then the feedback starts to diminish because people are, well, why would I even bother to give feedback if nothing happens? So yeah, I think you have to be able to come out and say, this is a change that we are making because of the feedback that we've received based on this and this. I mean, would you agree? Do you think there's a good way to do that? I don't know. I know it's probably not easy.
I think there's a lot that you can do by analyzing the data that comes in, but also benchmarking, right? There's a lot of value in seeing what your competitors are doing. So how are they selling their training? What are they selling? And there's nothing wrong if you're in corporate to benchmark yourself against some of the big learning and training platforms, for example, LinkedIn. So, they're ahead of the game. They've got heaps of money. So they're able to do things that, as a training manager, you can say, hey, my manager, right? This is what I see LinkedIn doing or Harvard Learning doing. Could we do that? Well, you can experiment it. So there's lots of things that you can be looking at internally and externally. But yeah, if you really want to get inspired, uh, go for the big guns. Take a look at what they're doing, and if you don't propose, you don't get. So benchmark and yeah, pitch.
Well, Sylvie, I want to ask you, sort of just a much more broad question in scope of, where you are with L&D and training. Is there anything that you're either currently working on that you're excited about, something that you wanted to address, or is there something in the space, like as trends wise go, that you're very has sparked you or that you're watching? Just something that's like on your mind in the next, few months that you're really focused on.
Yeah. I think, and this is not just for my job, but I think it's for all corporations. People create training. And you might have somebody creating it in Asia, and somebody creating it in North America, and somebody else creating it in Australia, and another person creating it, over in Finland. I think the biggest challenge for training managers is to actually consolidate all of that training in order to avoid a double work or redundancies, right? So imagine what would be possible if there was standard work, if there were templates, if the training were preceded by the marketing message, if it were concluded with a CSAT. So having all of those standard work steps that need to be done and then consolidated across all of the different regions so that we could have one curriculum. That is what I'm hoping to be able to build in the next few years. It's a massive job, and one that I'm very grateful to tackle because people create training with the best intentions.
Of course.
It's a job, and you have 100 things to do, and sometimes you just don't think, well, maybe somebody else already has it, and I don't know who to ask. So I'll just make it on my own. So yeah, it's a challenge, but it's a really good one, and one that I'll let you know if you invite me in 2 years' time whether I've achieved it or not.
In pursuit of that, are you exploring anything like getting back into things like large language models and AI that over the years these tools have gotten much better at translation. I'm still not at a place where I would just plug something into a translator and let it go. Right? I think we still want an expert in that
Yeah,
language to double and triple check. But I think we're
yeah.
light years from where we were, and things I think will only continue to get better. Are you investigating sort of technology solutions there to in that
Yes.
consolidation?
So that's a good follow-up to the question that you just asked me about having that one curriculum consolidated and standardized. Because just as an example, imagine that somebody has created content, really good content in Urdu. Yeah, a colleague has created content in India in the language Urdu, and I'm talking to her, and she says, "Yeah, I created this, blah blah blah." Oh, fantastic! That's one piece of training that I don't have in Italian. Can I have it translated by artificial intelligence into Italian? Yes, yes, I can, right? But I'm not going to share it with my consumers of learning unless I've had it vetted,
Right.
yeah, by a human who speaks Italian as their first language. Because as good as the AI is now, there are cultural
Yes.
differences. Yeah. There are technical differences. There may be measuring instrument
Mm-hmm.
differences, right? One could be metric, the other one is imperial. There are terminology differences. So I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I was working on translating a document from English to French. We hired a translation company. I spent as much time with the woman who was doing the translation as I would have going through it myself, simply because the technical terms were difficult and foreign to her. So you can have a document, you can have it translated by AI, but you need to have somebody who is a native speaker and who understands the technological terms in order to be able to say, yes, I give this my stamp of approval, and now we can publish it.
Yeah, because you mentioned it. It's so much more than just the language that the content is in. It's the cultural, geographical, all of that. Because you may have to present the content in a different way depending on where you're operating. So I think what this technology does is just open the doors to do some of the work that maybe wouldn't get started because of the scale of it. Because, well, we don't have the people to translate this. It's like, well, now you've got a tool that can get you 80%, 85% of the way there, and then people can sort of take over. Whereas, maybe it wouldn't have even been undertaken before.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that they can't reach the 100% accuracy with other content,
Mhm.
right? Like if the text that is going to be translated is simple enough,
Mhm.
it can probably do the
Yeah.
job. But yeah, in some environments that are particularly technical, yeah, it's the technology is not there yet.
Right. The way I look at it is it's this idea of centralization versus decentralization, right? And so like how much stuff can you centralize before you have to decentralize, right? And so at some point you have to be like, well, now that we're in this particular region, somebody has to handle everything from there, right? And in that region or that. Is that sort of in your mind how this is going to be structured, or what do you think?
No, I'm not there yet. But hypothetically, right? I mentioned standard work, and I think that that's absolutely essential in trying to control what falls out of the standard work process, right? So I really like a quote. People don't fail is systems or processes that fail. So people don't purposely do things wrong or to piss me off. Normally is that they didn't have a tool or they didn't have knowledge of a certain requirement, and they took the leap. God bless them. They took the leap and they did the work. It might be wrong, but it doesn't matter. At least they tried. I love that they tried, right? So when we talk about the standard work and having the measurements, so the gatekeepers at each part of the process, that makes sure that people stay in that process, then you really limit the amount of things that are out there and out of view. So when we're speaking about a curriculum, right? And let's go back to our main topic, right? Because we were talking about comparing academia to corporate. In academia, I'll give you an example. In a high school, it's relatively simple to work towards an end exam, right? So the standard is established by the government, right? And you know what you have to teach that year, and your students need to pass a certain exam at the end of the year, right? That isn't the case in corporate. In corporate, you start with what are the pain points, what are the customer wants, who's creating the training, how is it vetted, and yeah, if you don't have a standard work process and all the gatekeepers along the way, then yeah, you risk things falling through the gaps. And I don't think things falling through the gap are necessarily a bad thing as long as I know where to pick them up, which means ultimately creating visibility for me and for my team and for what we're doing. And the only way that I can really get visibility for what I'm doing is to have my manager and his managers and their managers say, that lady there, she's the one who's the strategic training manager. Please follow her standard work.
I wish it was that easy for everyone. It's difficult sometimes to get
It's not easy, David.
to
It's
get
not.
that consensus of where to follow. But definitely a goal towards to work towards. Well, I just wanted to thank you again for sharing, because, like I said, it's great to get this perspective where you've been at all these different places in your career, so you get to bring that all together. I think there's a lot to learn there, and I look forward to hearing in the future how this endeavor goes with creating this sort of global learning campaign that you've envisioned. I'd love to see how that
Yeah.
turns out for
Yeah.
you.
For the moment is Europe.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that's challenge enough.
plenty.
And then, we'll see where the fates take me.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Well, Sylvie, thanks again. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of They Learn, You Win, presented by Skooks. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe in your podcast player, and follow me, David Wentworth, on LinkedIn. I try to distill what works and what doesn't for L&D leaders so you can stay up to speed on the latest insights, ideas, and tech. See you next time.